Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mike Steckline, partner with the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. Real treat today, friend and colleague Tim Pettry from the Cleveland Clinic agreed to do a presentation on something he shared with me in the past, and we've had a couple conversations about it, and he put together a terrific presentation today. So I'll do a brief intro here and then turn it over to Tim quickly. Just by way of some housekeeping, the phones are going to be muted in order to minimize background noise, but there's an opportunity during Q&A to unmute, but you can always use the chat function to type in questions or comments. And as this is being recorded, it's going to be available for you and others who would like to benefit in sharing with others. So I am going to turn it over to Tim. He'll explain a little bit about who he is and what he does, and I've known him for a number of years and always benefit from learning from Tim. So Tim, you've got the controls, so tell us what you know.
Great, Mike. It might not take very long, but no, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to share some of the thoughts that I've had over the years. So when I started putting this together, it was really trying to capture some of the highlights of my career. I've been doing continuous improvement work for approximately 25 to 30 years, somewhere in between there. And I just wanted to share with you some of my thoughts and how that's shaped the work that I'm currently doing. So a little bit of my background, I got my BS in Business Administration from Bowling Green State University and had a specialty in retailing, and went to work for the May Company in Cleveland, which is now part of Macy's. But the start with retailing really gave me a good foundation about customer service and what was required to provide good customer service. Unfortunately, I found that retailing and family didn't go well together. My first daughter was born right before Father's Day. I was the department manager of a men's area, and it was the second busiest time of the year for us. So I had to miss out on some things when my daughter was born, and then Christmas tended to not be as much fun. So I decided to get out of retailing and was fortunate to end up with Ernst & Winnie at the time, since merged into become Ernst & Young. And while I was there, I had a real opportunity to work with some really good people. I worked in the National Marketing Department, where we provided a lot of secondary research to our audit offices around the country, and had the opportunity there to learn a lot about business, learn a lot about companies, officers and directors. We did a lot of work around competitor research, and had the opportunity there to work for a gentleman by the name of Jim Turley, who then went on to become chairman and CEO of Ernst & Young, and just was a real great guy to work for, and I learned a lot from him. I also worked for a partner there by the name of John Tierney, and John was the one who taught me that there's no such thing as a 5-run home run. And so what that really meant was my first taste of incremental change, and that, you know, bunts and singles and walks are just as good if you can string them together. And so learned a lot while I was there. I also started working towards my MBA while I was going to school working at Ernst & Young, and really focused on management and labor relations while I was there, and was all set to do my final research project when the merger took place. And so I didn't get to finalize my project at Ernst & Young, which was a really cool research-based database that provided a lot of information, cut down on the amount of time we spent searching for information, and allowed us to spend more time analyzing the information. And I ended up at Ford Motor Company in Cleveland. By chance, my father-in-law was superintendent of maintenance, wanted to make sure that his daughter was taken care of. And so he said, give me a resume, we'll see what happens. And I got offered a position as a cost analyst. And when I got the call for the interview, I told them that I had no background in manufacturing. And even though I worked for an accounting firm, my specialty was marketing. And they said, well, they're just looking for a good business person. So they offered me a position. I took it. did not enjoy it for the first 6 months that I was there. But then I had an opportunity. We had a new engine program that was starting up, and the analyst who was supposed to go support that program ended up leaving the company. So I went to our controller and said that I probably had the least amount to unlearn in a new program, and I'd be willing to learn from the bottom up. And so he gave me that opportunity. And I got to work for a gentleman by the name of Gifford Brown, who was the plant manager. Gifford was ahead of his time at Ford when it came to lean thinking. He was actually used to go on speaking tours with Shingo and was responsible for helping get the Shingo Prize started. Gifford served as the chairman of the board of governors for Shingo in the early years, and he was also able to secure funding from Ford in order to keep the Shingo Prize running up front. And Gifford's idea when he was starting the new plant was he wanted to create a production system similar to Toyota's. And so he hired some ex-Toyota Georgetown managers, including Russ Scafferty, who had been the manager of the powertrain plant in Georgetown, to come and help us put together what we were calling the Cleveland production system. And then that's how I first got involved with really lean thinking. We went on to launch the plant very successfully, applying for the Shingo Prize in 1995. When we won the prize and collected it in 96, I became a Shingo examiner, was appointed by Gifford to take one of those roles. And that's probably been the biggest break in my career, was being able to get involved with the Shingo organization. From there, in Plant 2, when I was at Plant 2, we won the prize, and my reward for that was I got to go over to Plant 1, which was not in the same situation that Plant 2 was in. It was an older plant. The plant had just lost one engine line. The second engine line production volumes were cut in half. We just negotiated a new contract with the UAW that said that we were going to go to a team-based approach rather than seniority. The people who were in Plant 1 were people who had chosen not to go to Plant 2 and that opened up because they did not want to be part of teams. And we were now, the Cleveland production system had just morphed into the Ford production system, and all plants were expected to implement the Ford production system. And my role was to go over to Plant 1 and implement teams wall-to-wall and implement the Ford production system. And oh, by the way, the plant was scheduled to close in 3 years, and everybody knew that. So work was cut out for us. I got the chance to work with John Nahorny, who was my UAW partner, and we put together plans for how to train the organization and implement the Ford production system. And long story short, we ended up getting checkpoint A for the Ford production system. The plant ended up getting a new engine program. We had to shut down for a couple of years so that we could retool, and then we opened up and we started all over again. And that second time when we started up gave me a chance to learn a lot about organizational development. We worked with a man by the name of Barry Rubin, who works for a company called Team Path, and they helped us put into place a program called Changing Role of the Leader. And there we were able to work with the leadership team to turn the plant around. We had started out with some initial results from a cultural survey that said that we were in the 9th or 10th percentile for team orientation and for capability development. And so we implemented this program, and we moved up about 60 percentage points in the next year, and had some great results. Unfortunately, at Ford, with the rest of the industry, things turned sour in 2008, and that's when I was fortunate to end up with the Cleveland Clinic, one of the nation's, world's most foremost healthcare organizations, right in my backyard, and just starting with continuous improvement. And so I was able to come in near the beginnings of the program, and have been here for the last 10 years, using the stuff that I've learned from Shingo and all of the other things, and then learning about the healthcare industry. And I'll share some of that stuff with you in a little bit. Two other things that I wanted to share with you is that I had a chance to meet a man about 5 or 6 years ago who was visiting a family member here. And we started talking, and I asked him what he did, and he said, I help to prevent the diseases that you treat here. And I said, that's great, but what do you do? And he said, well, I'm a consultant to the dairy industry. And so we started talking, and the more he talked, the more I realized he was talking the language of lean, but he had never been to a formal lean training, didn't know really what it was, but his actions, his behaviors, everything that he was putting in place was all about lean. And so he and I had a chance to work together to basically help pull all of his business stuff together into an operating system. If you're interested in learning more about it, you can go on YouTube and do a search for Chosen Acres operating system, and you'll see some fascinating stuff from Jeff Weisel. And then finally, one of the most gratifying things was my wife works for a local outdoor history museum called Hale Farm and Village. He's the education and public program manager there. And she started working with some of the crafts and trades people, recognizing that there was no standard work, that there was inconsistency in the product, that there was no level scheduling. And she put into place all of these different tools of lean and was actually able to give a presentation at a national conference at Williamsburg. And it was just kind of a gratifying thing to see that Toyota Production System started with weaving industry and the looms. And here my wife was giving a presentation on how to apply lean to the craft industry. And so it was really a neat thing for me, and I learned a lot from it. So what I want to do now is just real quick, some key learnings, and then I'll get into some of the meat of this. So first of all, whether it's retailing or manufacturing or any of these different industries, they are different, but what I learned is that there's a lot of similarities. And the similarities come from the fact that the guiding principles of lean and Shingo are constant, universal, timeless. There are consequences whether you believe them or not. If you believe in them and practice them, you'll get positive results. If you don't and don't practice them, there will be negative consequences. And it helps you to be predictable as well in terms of what to expect if you follow these guiding principles. Second is that systems and metrics do drive behaviors. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We found in our work that Shingo looks at systems and evaluates systems, business systems. We found that there are 4 key systems that drive the majority of work, and those form the basis of our improvement model here at the clinic. And like the systems of your body, flow is essential. And so if there's one thing that I can say about my experience with lean is that if you can focus on flow of materials, flow of patients, flow of information, flow of values, which I'll talk about in a while, all of that is essential, and where that flow stops is where you find waste. And in the body, you want you want blood flow, you want airflow, you want other types of flow. And I joke around that, when you think of the systems of the body and try to apply those to business systems, what I found is that when we looked at continuous improvement, we are like the excretory system. We find and eliminate waste. So that's my little humor. One of the other things is that treat your organization as you would like your doctor to treat you. And so I'll talk a little bit about that and some specific behaviors. And then finally, if you're not having fun doing this, something's wrong. You should be having some success. You should be celebrating those successes, and you should be doing it in a way that people are having a good time doing that. So I'll talk about some of the fun activities that I've created and used to help teach some of the concepts. So the transition that I made from manufacturing into healthcare was not the smoothest. It was a little bit difficult. First year was a little difficult, but here are some of the things that I heard. So when I was interviewing for the position, I had a chance to interview with our chief experience officer, Dr. Cosgrove, who was the CEO at that time, hired this woman to be our chief experience officer and referred to her as the other CEO. And one of the things that she said when we were talking was that be careful when talking about waste with nurses. Nurses believe that everything that they do is for the patient. And so if you start talking about how it's wasteful, you're going to lose them very quickly. And so I learned right away, focus on the process, not the person. And when you focus on the process and what's getting in the way of the nurses being able to do their job, you're going to be much more successful. Next thing I heard was in the first week I was here, I participated in a Kaizen event where we were looking at our internal medicine department, trying to bring together 3 clinics that were on our main campus into one space that we were backfilling into when we opened up a new tower. And as we were looking at that, I got a chance to go and shadow patients. And when I was shadowing the patients, I noticed that we were making them move from place to place while we were, as caregivers, were staying stationary. And I said, when I look at that, if I go to a world-class restaurant, I can make a reservation. When I show up, they can take me to my table. Everybody comes to me and services me. I said, that's kind of world-class care. I said, but here we make the patient move around. And the response that I got was that, well, we're not restaurant workers. And I understand now where the context of that came from, but it kind of took me back initially. And healthcare people are not restaurant workers. However, we do need to have that focus on the patient, and so it was important to understand that this was a different environment that I had to be aware of. When I started at the clinic, I was a Shingo examiner. I was used to doing assessments of organizations. I was also a member of the Lean Certification Oversight and Appeals Committee, being an appointed member for Shingo. And I started talking about those terms, and very quickly was told, we're not going to use those terms. Nobody knows what Shingo is. Healthcare people don't like to be assessed, even though they assess people on a daily basis as patients. And certification was just a piece of paper and didn't mean anything. And I tried to explain that it's a lot more than that, but that was not valued here at that time. The other thing was that Lean was a tool and under our improvement step and at that time, our continuous improvement model. And so I was very quickly pigeonholed as the Lean guy, which I would normally feel good about, but at this pace, it was, kind of limiting me. And I had to do a lot of recalibrating with my leadership to say, when I talk about Lean, it's really the overall umbrella of continuous improvement. So that was a difficult thing. And then finally, I found out that the pace was a lot different. In manufacturing, you knew daily how you were doing. Same in retailing, you knew on a daily basis how your sales were. In healthcare, we were trying to implement monthly business reviews. And so it was really a challenge to get used to that pace, that we would wait a month before we would review things, and that data would be very old. And so it was a kind of a different atmosphere. And then there was the language. When I first started talking to one of our chairs of one of our cerebral vascular center, he and his administrator, I was meeting with them for the first time to introduce the concept of business reviews. And before we got started, he said, "You're not going to use any of these buzzwords with us, are you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he and his administrator started firing off all of these buzzwords. And here what had happened was that a predecessor of mine had come from industry, was using a lot of the terminology that was used in business, and it really kind of turned healthcare people off to the point to where administrators created a business buzzword bingo. And when they would be in meetings, they would be texting each other about words that were being used. And so I learned quickly that I had to learn the language of the people that I was going to be working with. And I'll share that in a little bit in terms of how that came to be. So a couple of weeks ago, I had that chance to be part of a focus group discussion. And one of the questions that we had, our panel discussion, one of the questions that somebody asked was, what have we learned since Deming and other thought leaders started the quality movement? And I thought about it for a second, and not much, but then I thought again and said, yeah, we've learned a lot about how not to do things. We have there's a lot of different programs. There's Lean, there's Six Sigma, there's TQM, there's ISO 9000, there's all kinds of theory of constraints. There's a lot of things that are all have a specific role and are all part of the improvement process. But we haven't really learned how to put them all together. And so when you go back and you look at the work that the Shingo organization has done, and they went back and looked to see what are the things that were missing. About 10 years ago, the Shingo program changed their focus from tools-based to systems and principle-based. And what they did is they went back and looked at Deming, and they looked at Stephen Covey, and they found out that there were some guiding principles that if you followed those principles, you're going to be okay. So I think that we've started to prove that Deming and other thought leaders were right in most of their thinking. So then when I was been working at the clinic, one of the things that I found, I had a chance to work with Dr. Mark Hyman, who was starting a functional medicine program here at the clinic. And what I did when I was working with him is started to understand a little bit how they did their work and what their focus was. And I want to show you a video, quick video now that Dr. Hyman gave. And what I want you to do is think about this. When he's talking about functional medicine, think about it from the mindset of a functional management perspective. And then after the video, we'll come back and discuss it a little bit.
People say, what kind of doctor are you? What do you do? I say, I practice functional medicine. They go, what's that? I say, well, it's the opposite of dysfunctional medicine. And I'm sure some of you probably have experienced that. Functional medicine is a map. It's a GPS system. It's actually a way of navigating through the landscape of illness through mechanisms, not diseases, through patterns that Jay was talking about, through understanding the connections and the patterns that are present in our whole system. It's actually personalized medicine. It's systems medicine. It's the medicine of connectivity. It's the medicine that connects the dots between all the things that are going wrong in our biology. It's the medicine of why. We're very good at naming diseases, at the what in medicine, but we're not very good at asking why. Why does this disease occur? What is the underlying cause? In functional medicine, we're not super specialists, we're super generalists. We understand how everything connects together. It's a very different model. We have to understand the system, not the symptom. In fact, how do we do this in functional medicine? Well, we do it through extensive histories and questionnaires that analyze the data of a person's story. We do it through extensive laboratory testing and functional biomarkers and genomics that give us the clinical decision-making tools we need to navigate the landscape of illness by looking at mechanisms and not diseases. And it's an enormous paradigm shift. I mean, to say that diseases don't exist, to say that the way we think about things isn't exactly the way we thought, to say that the Earth is no longer the center of the universe, that we don't have fixed species, that they evolve. I mean, these are major paradigm shifts. That's where we are in medicine today. And it's a paradigm shift that's actually not something that's going to happen in the future. It's actually happening right now. What I've heard in this conference from Denny Hillis and Anna Barker and many others is that we have to look at the whole system. That there's some point in the future when we'll be able to diagnose people based on the dynamic interactions that are giving play to give rise to the symptoms or the diseases that we see clinically. But we don't have to wait for the future. The future is here. And it's a model, it's a practical application, it's comprehensive, and it applies the latest systems biology in a method that can be taught, and it's scalable, it's doable. And it's called functional medicine.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike. So one of the things in watching that video to me is that as Dr. Hyman was talking about what functional medicine is, it really was describing what I thought continuous improvement was. And so we started talking about the similarities between the way functional medicine practices and the way continuous improvement does. And so I came up with the term, when Dr. Hyman says that functional medicine is the opposite of dysfunctional medicine, I looked at Lean and said, it's really the opposite of dysfunctional management. So functional management has the same characteristics as functional medicine. And so here's some of the things that Dr. Hyman said. He said it's a map, and we'll talk about each of these in detail as we go through this. So functional medicine or management is a map. It's personalized management. It's systems management. It's the management of connectivity. It's the management of why. It's understanding the system, not the symptom. It's super generalist versus super specialist. And this is one of my favorite Far Side cartoons that really is this description of what dysfunctional management is. And when I thought about this a little bit more, people can get hung up on the term functional management. It's really opposite of management by function. And we do a lot of management by function. And what I'm proposing here is that lean is really about how do we make that into functional management. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then finally, he said it can be taught, is scalable, and is doable. So I'm going to go through each of these a little bit and give some examples. So when we talk about functional management as a map, Dr. Hyman said it's a GPS system, a way of navigating through the landscape of illness, through mechanisms, not diseases, through patterns, understanding connections present in the whole system. And when you look at the Shingo model for operational excellence, they talk about that most of the systems that guide the way people work in our companies were designed to create a specific business result without regard for the behavior that the system consequently drives. And so when we look at the Shingo model and we see the guiding principles that are part of it, we start to see how there is a map for how to put in place a functional management system. It starts with guiding principles that then help to align the systems, and those systems select the tools, and then the tools help you to achieve the results. And as you achieve the results that you're looking for, it affirms the guiding principles. And in the middle of that is the culture, the behaviors that the organization is exhibiting. And so the things that we talked about before is that systems and metrics are the things that really drive a culture and the behaviors that we're looking for. And so Shingo provides that map for operational excellence and what functional management should look like. The next thing is it's personalized management. And so I started thinking of the organization as patient. And when I was having that discussion with our cerebrovascular chairman, it reinforced the fact I need to understand how do I talk their language. And so I started thinking about what a business review was and realized that, it starts with asking, what's the wellness goal you're trying to achieve, or where does it hurt? Or in A3 thinking, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And that starts to lead us down the path of how do we start to now work on that. We then look at vital signs, or in the business term, it's the metrics that help us talk about the health. So in a patient, there's 4 vital signs. An organization, what are the vital signs or the metrics that we look at that help you understand that you're not as healthy as you'd like to be? So this is really understanding the current condition. We then do a history and physical. What have you done in the past that's worked? What hasn't worked? What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? We understand a little bit about where did people come from? What's their history before we start to go in and start to say, this is how you need to do things. Because they may have already been doing some of those things in the past, and we need to understand if there's any barriers there. We then do a diagnosis, and this is really the root cause analysis, finding out, not treating the symptoms, but really digging down to find out what are the causes. And so when a physician or a doctor is working with a patient, he has to use a lot of different tests and a lot of different things to try and get to a diagnosis to get to the root cause of the problem. We do the same in continuous improvement. We then come up with a plan of care, or what are the countermeasures that we want to put in place in order to address the problems and the root causes that we're seeing. And then we schedule a follow-up appointment. We come back and we see, did the plan of care work? If it did, great, let's continue doing it. If it didn't, let's make some adjustments. And so it really is about this PDCA cycle. And so rather than going in and trying to do the same thing to every part of the organization that we're dealing with, we go through this process of really looking at how do we personalize this, meeting people where they are, rather than trying to bring them to where we want them to be. So we go there first, and so that's where it becomes personalized. And the other thing is finally, don't adopt, adapt. And we found this as we've done a lot of assessments in Shingo, is that rather than trying to just adopt best practices that we see, we adapt them to our situation. So it's okay to make some adjustments depending upon what's the problem that you're trying to solve. It's systems management. And so this is a copy of our Cleveland Clinic improvement model. And as we were building our assessment tool and looking at, we kind of shifted away from assessment into aspirational. And if you look at the Shingo model as an aspirational model, it's what are you trying to achieve? What are you looking to do? And so when we were doing some initial in-house assessments in some of our institutes, we kept coming back to 4 main systems that if we were to focus on those only, we would get to be about 80% of where we want it to be. And so we came up with the organizational alignment, visual management, problem solving, and standardization. And as we were working on a team to put this together, somebody asked the question, well, what is it that you mean by organizational alignment? Because not everybody's going to understand that terminology. And somebody came up and said, it's what matters most. And so we adopted that as kind of the catchphrase for what we're doing. So when we start off with people, we ask them what matters most to you. And then we ask them, how are you doing and how do you know? And so we use visual management to help us measure how are we doing to what matters most. We then use problem solving to help us close the gap between where we are versus where we want to be. So that helps us to improve what matters most. And then once we've improved things, how do we standardize so that we can sustain the improvements? We adopted the 3 different levels of the organization and said that there are different behaviors associated with the role that you play in the organization. And we allow people to self-identify what role they are in this model. So for example, physicians are actually senior leaders as well as frontline caregivers. And so it's important for them to understand both roles. So what we do now with this, in the past, we would go in and talk to people about what continuous improvement was, and it was difficult for us to articulate exactly what we could do. Now we go in with this sheet of paper, we say, here's the improvement model. What matters most to you? How do you know how you're doing, and how do you measure that? And then how do you solve problems? So it's been a very easy way for us to introduce the concept of continuous improvement instead of having to constantly answer, what is it that we do? One other thing about this is that we intentionally called it the Cleveland Clinic improvement model, not the continuous improvement model, because we wanted this to be everybody's model, not just continuous improvement. And so we didn't get any pushback from that. And what we've done over the last 4 to 5 years is every year we reach out to other parts of the organization to refine the language, make sure that the language reflects what is currently going on in the system. So we look at quality, we look at office of patient experience, we look at human resources, and how do we align the thinking so that this becomes everybody's model. This has been one of our biggest successes so far in terms of helping us to really move forward. It's a manage of connectivity. So we talk about in lean value streams, systems thinking versus local optimization, change management, how do you connect current situation to where we want to be, what's the vision that we have. And so I do a little exercise with people to help demonstrate this point. I want to take you through it real quick. So the exercise is that we've come up with a new set of numbers, symbols for the numbers 1 through 10. I'm going to give you about 30 to 40 seconds to look at these symbols and then see how well you do. So I'll go ahead and show them to you here. Don't write anything down. This is just looking and trying to memorize. And what we'll do is I'll, in a little bit, take that off the screen and let you try to write down as many as you can remember. So we got about 15 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So now what I would do is ask people to write down as many of the numbers, symbols, as you can remember. And I'm not going to take a long time to do this, but when we do this, we give people time to try and remember it. And then I put them back up and I ask you to check your answers and see how you do. And typically what happens is you may have one person in the group who gets them all right, but typically most people get about 6 to 7 right. And so what I do, what this really is a demonstration of, is people are looking for patterns. They want to know where they fit in. And through just memorization, it's hard. We're looking at silos here. We're not looking at this as a system. So if I were to show it to them this way, where you put it in a tic-tac-toe figure, the outline around each of the numbers represents the symbol. So now if I were to come back a year from now and ask you what are the symbols for the numbers 1 through 10, all you would have to do is to remember tic-tac-toe, and you'd be able to get it. And the reason that this is important is that this really starts to show how lean is all about the connectivity. People understand if I'm working in the one department, I pretty much have made a lot of improvements, know what I'm doing, understand my job. And so there's not a lot of room for improvement there. But what happens is that it's in these handoff areas. It's where they intersect with everybody else. That becomes where the real opportunities are. And so that's why it's important to look at things more as a system rather than as silos. So this is just a quick exercise that we use to get people to start thinking beyond their function and more into how can we be functional. So Dr. Hyman talks about the management of why, and this is something that we understand in Lean is that, the constancy of purpose. Why are we in existence? Why does our organization exist? And then why do we have problems, and what are the root causes? And so we use 5 why analysis to help us get to the real solutions. It's understanding the system, not the symptom. So we teach and talk a lot about the 8 wastes. 8 wastes are symptoms of poor systems. And so when we look at value stream analysis, we see that that helps us to identify the waste, but it's looking at the overall system and how it impacts things. And what we don't want to do, going back to the connectivity thing, is have that local optimization where we fix things in one area and make it very efficient, only to find out that the next area can't accept all of the work that's being sent to them. So we need to really understand this as a system and ask the question, what's wrong with the system that's creating the symptom? Talked about super generalists versus super specialists. And so we have the saying on our improvement model is every caregiver capable, empowered, and expected to make improvements every day. So that's continuous improvement is everyone's responsibility. So we're developing a bunch of super generalists versus super specialists who are continuous improvement specialists who are Six Sigma black belts, have their lean certification. And the challenge is coming up with the right mix. And so we use continuous improvement specialists to help coach and deliver transfer capability so that everyone is capable of doing this. And I put this poster up here. It's a group I was working with at Akron General. And after only about 6 to 8 weeks working with them, one of the managers in the area came up with this poster of what continuous improvement and the culture of improvement was all about. And it was something where she really got it. She did research on her own, and she became one of those super generalists who really understood that continuous improvement was not something else that she did. It was part of her job as a nurse manager. So good practice needs both, but in the right mix. Can be taught, is scalable, and is doable. So we focus on model units to try and teach this, but we're also doing it at an institute level, we're doing it at a hospital level, and we're starting to get into the enterprise level, and we hope to have influence over the whole healthcare industry. And so this is just an example of us teaching at a model area, model unit level, but I'm currently working now at a hospital level to get Akron General aligned with this. So one of the things that came out of this as well was looking at I was able to find this article on the 7 key traits of the ideal doctor. And if you replace doctor with CI or lean practitioner, they fit. So we want you to be confident. We want the CI practitioner to be empathetic. We understand what people are going through. We need to be humane. So we're caring and compassionate and kind. We're personal. So we have more of an interest than just the business piece of it. We want to understand how this is affecting everybody. Forthright tells me what I need to know in plain language, and in a forthright manner. Is respectful. And so as CI practitioners, we need to be respectful of others. We need to be thorough, so we're conscientious and persistent. And then finally, this last paragraph that I found, and especially the last sentence, every doctor or CI practitioner needs to know how to apply their knowledge with wisdom and relate to us as plain folks who are capable of understanding our disease and treatment. So this is how we need to start to interact with the people that we're helping to improve. We need to come at them from an understanding of where their problems are and how we're able to help them. So I'm currently working at Akron General Hospital Health System. I've been here for a little over a year now, and just a little bit of history of Akron General. It's been around since 1914 and officially integrated with the clinic in 2015. And so it's a major inner city hospital, and also was a hospital system. So there's another small rural hospital in Lodi, Ohio. We have 3 ambulatory surgery centers that are part of the system. It is a level 1 trauma center, and nursing has achieved magnet status for the 2nd time now. And so it's a fairly large hospital within the Cleveland Clinic system. And so as we start talking about how do we implement the culture of improvement and accelerate the implementation, I came across the thinking around the board game Risk, which, if you think about Risk, if you ever played the game Risk, there's some things that you need to know about. So initial alignment of resources is important. So you get so many armies to start off, and you put your armies where the countries that you own. And then you get some additional armies, and you now need to pick your battles on which areas do you want to go and invade and try and take control over. So in this case, how do we share our knowledge? Don't spread yourself too thin, because at the end of each round, other people will come back and start to attack you. As we implement model areas, we find that if we don't do a good job in implementing things, there will be some pushback over time, and people will start to go back to the way they were doing things. So we have to maintain some contact with those areas. We need to leave capability behind, and we need to pause, assess, and reinforce resources every once in a while. And so that's how we're doing our model area approach. What I'm trying to do and experimenting with at Akron right now is how are we developing our leaders who can then help accelerate the implementation on many different fronts. So my main model area at Akron General has been with the senior leadership team, the executive leadership team, where we're trying to get them to model the behaviors and model what we expect out of a model area. And now we're going to rely on the leaders to start implementing in the model areas. I'm here by myself. I've got a couple of other resources to help out, but we can't do it all at once, so we need to rely on the leaders to help with that. Another experiment that we're doing, or a thought that I've had over the years, is that typically when people start the improvement process, they start with the frontline people, and they do a lot of training and implementation. Don't really have middle managers or senior leaders involved. It allows us to get some quick wins, but very quickly we start to understand that we're not going to be able to sustain it, and we're not going to get very far because of this misalignment. So the first step that we typically do, first adjustment, is we flip the pyramid. And so many organizations, from a serving leader standpoint, and I know when I was at Ford we did this, we talked about flipping the pyramid so that the weight of the organization is on the shoulders of senior leaders. And I always was uncomfortable with this, because if you think about the most unstable geometric shape, an upside down pyramid is probably it. And also as a senior leader, and now rather than having the support of the whole organization to help you get through, you're now really have the whole weight of the organization on your shoulders. So that's a big burden. And so what I would suggest otherwise than what you do is that we take the pyramid and we lay it down on its side, and now you've got senior leaders in front, middle managers and front lines aligned with that. What happens with when we flip the pyramid is that we've still missed that middle manager layer. And what I found is that that middle manager layer is really critical to the overall long-term success of any lean program that we're trying to implement. So with the laid-back model, you've got senior leaders in front still leading the way, but you've got alignment now with the middle managers in the front line. And this is what we're trying to do here. I've been working with the senior leaders to then help align their areas with what they're doing. And this is a nice long-term sustainment approach. And when you look at it from a standpoint of over time, how does this work? You're going to get so much of the organization in year one, so much in year two, and hopefully within the first 3 years, you've got the organization all involved. And you're still going to have some resistors out there. But the idea is that we want to get the bulk of the organization quickly. So we focus on the executive team. We have a director cohort here at the clinic or at Akron General, and then we're talking about the nursing units and supply and support areas down here. We use several sustainment mechanisms. So we're using tiered huddles now. We have a policy deployment process, and we do leadership rounding to help reinforce this. So the other thing that we learned is really about how important it is to socialize the model, and doing this at multiple levels of the organization. So we have a monthly health system leadership meeting where we've got over 100 managers and above. I was given 20 to 30 minutes each month to socialize the improvement model with this team. So it was really just exposing them to the concepts and being able to expose them to what we're trying to do. They then established some interest and then started to pull on services to help them get started. We do executive leadership rounding each month where our hospital president, Dr. Brian Hart, starts every meeting with, here's the improvement model, here are the behaviors that we're going to focus on today, and let's go out in pairs of 2 to each of the units and talk to caregivers and talk to patients to find out what are we doing well and what could we be doing better, and practicing empathy at the same time. We have a hospital operations team that meets weekly that we share the improvement model. We have a directors council where it's a weekly meeting where all the directors and above come together, and we're able to help socialize the model with them and to report out on some of the strategy tactics that we've been working on. We have daily safety and patient flow huddles where we talk about patient flow. We talk about any safety concerns. We have all of our nursing directors and support people in that meeting to hear from each other in terms of what are the key things that are going on in the hospital for the day. We have daily shift handoff huddles, as well as weekly Kaizen board huddles, where teams will meet for 15 minutes to talk about the improvement ideas that they've come up with and the progress that they're making on those ideas. And then we have unit-based councils in our nursing areas that our local nursing units meet monthly to discuss the improvements. So we had a lot of opportunities to socialize. One other thing, and this was an experiment that when we initially started it, I would say probably failed. We've learned a little bit about it, and we're continuing to work on it. But it's rather than focusing on model areas, which is a good way of doing things, and we're having some success with it. So this is not to knock model areas, but it's to say, can we take a model metric and use the coaching Kata, which we use the 5 questions to help us understand how to do things? Can we use that to help people understand how to use the model? So in other words, we pick one metric that cuts across all functions and departments. When we started this, we were looking at engagement. Now we're probably going to be changing it to something else. Establish a target. So what's the target condition? Establish the baseline, where are we now? And then use the improvement model to teach caregivers how to manage the work. So what matters most? It's what we're measuring. It's our organizational alignment. How do you know how we're doing? We use the metric. how do we improve? We do Kaizen and come up with ways of improving our metric, and then how do we sustain that? And then once that process is experienced with one metric, it can be repeated with others. This is something that you can do with all areas of the hospital, and rather than having to go model area to model area, you're teaching the concept of the model to everybody at the same time. It's difficult to do. We're still working on that, but it's one of the experiments that we're looking at. And then finally, with the culture of improvement, the key things that we learned: use the language of your customer, look for opportunities to socialize all the time, identify and reinforce the ideal behaviors that you'd like to see. Systems and metrics drive those behaviors, so make sure that you've aligned your systems and metrics to drive the ideal behaviors. Use a system approach versus tools, and alignment is key. And one of the catchphrases that I came up with a while ago was that where values align, value multiplies. And so what I call values stream alignment, where we want values to flow up and down the organization, sideways, diagonally, and where those values are not aligned is where you'll find waste. So I talked about being fun. These are just a couple of things that I've done to help make things fun. We do a tic-tac-toe exercise that you just did. Groundhog Day bowling, so Groundhog Day is coming up. This was something that we developed to celebrate our newfound status of being non-value added when I was at Ford. I was a cost analyst at the time, working with a couple of engineers, and we found out that we were non-value added. So we came up with an event to celebrate that status, and it really helps to drive understanding of behaviors. If you're interested, let me know. I can fill you in on the details of that. We've done throughput putt-putt to demonstrate the concept of first time through. We've developed a Scrabble simulation to teach the Shingo principles. We use Legos and chess pieces for layouts and scheduling. We did that in the functional medicine department. We've done cardboard food pantries in our Cleveland Playhouse, which we acquired probably 7 years ago, right across the street from the clinic. We used their main stage to build a cardboard replica of a food pantry to demonstrate how the line will work. I've used Brio train engines and track to simulate engine assembly line at Ford, where we were going to a low volume line. We actually figured out what the proper size batch was using the right amount of people. We use poker chips and pennies for exercises to help build trust, connect four. We've done arm wrestling, marshmallows and spaghetti with the marshmallow challenge. We use the Who's on First video, Abbott and Costello, to teach the concept of visual management versus verbal management. And then Mike's favorite is our message in the bottle, where I use a bottle to demonstrate that lean is really about keeping people while eliminating waste. And then finally, trying to get people to think about, are you winning or losing for the day? Are you keeping a record? And what do you need to do to improve that record? So those are some of the things that I've done. Finally, the last thing I wanted to do is make you guys aware, this is a video that just came out day before yesterday, but it's with Dr. Hyman interviewing Dr. Cosgrove, who was the previous CEO at the Cleveland Clinic, on why the CEO of Cleveland Clinic embraced functional medicine. It's a fascinating discussion from two really good thought leaders on getting to root causes of the problems in our healthcare system. So that's it. Here's some information. If you want to have some further discussion, these are ways that you can connect with me. And I would suggest that if you get a chance, go to YouTube and type in Cleveland Clinic Continuous Improvement, and you'll see some good examples of some of the work that we've been doing here at the clinic. And with that, I turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Tim. That's super. Absolutely super. I always learn something from listening to you. I encourage Tim to take his time. We do have a few minutes to ask questions. I've unmuted the phones. If you want to ask questions, you can also type anything into the chat function. I'll pause and see what people have. Tim, I think you've been very thorough. People are just scribbling notes, and they're
I,
they're taking it all in.
yeah, there's a lot there, and I realize go through it. There's a lot of information.
Yeah, that's fine. I took some notes. Some of the things that I will include in the follow up is Tim talked briefly about the fun things that he's done, and he's really done a lot of them. And one of them was a bottle puzzle that I've made a short video out of that features Tim in the middle of it. I'm going to share that. The Chosen Acres work with the dairy farm. I'll make a link directly to that so people can learn from that. Dr. Hyman's one of his books on how to eat better and looking at some of those ways to take care of the human body as a system. I have read that book, find it very beneficial, and then also just a reminder of that video to take a look at the interview with Dr. Cosgrove and Dr. Hyman. So here's what's going to happen next. So a copy of this recording, well, first of all, on our website, you'll find that this is going to be moved to the previous pages, so you can always find that there, and that's one way to get to the recording. You'll be able to find it there. Coming up February 8th, a friend and colleague, Jason Ewing, he works in the IT area, and he's going to be talking about We Are Hoarders of Technology, and it features healthcare IT, but I think it could apply to a lot of other industries as well. Skipping forward to May, friend and colleague Didier Robino from here in the Twin Cities is going to be talking about leader standard work, and I think that's going to be very interesting. So he's committed the date and time to do that, Friday, May 17th. Then there's some topics in the work, and you can see the list here. Several people have stepped forward and said they would like to do some things and would be featuring some things. So I'm always interested in having some more people step forward, just as Tim did, and he's done a brilliant job today, so really appreciate that. I think that, let's see, what else do I have here? Oh, some next white papers. So we've got a number of white papers that we've published, and there's two that I want to work on simultaneously. One is on leader standard work, or the personal management system, and one is on managing for daily improvement. And to think about that, and just to quickly help you to understand the way that we're thinking about this, is the key roles in an organization plus the customers. How do you think about that? There is a system, and in the ideal world, where would be people be spending most of their time developing and deploying the strategy here. Everyone has a role, but you can see, the way to where the role would be here. The URL to the most recent white paper that we've written, the Pracademic's Guide to Strategy Deployment, can be found at that bit.ly link. And the key activities that you might see people playing at various roles of the organization are just illustrated there. There's another system that we call it Managing for Daily Improvement. How do you think about that? Everyone has a role there. Their roles are a little bit different. And then there's this space in the middle that we can just call it, what's the standard work? And everyone has some type of standard work. Leaders have standard work, managers have standard work, the front line has standard work. And so what I'm in the current state, many organizations find that it's not a 50-50 split, that they find themselves leaders put into daily problem solving and firefighting and less time to devote on the strategic. So how do you help to move people to a more balanced approach? And so the latest white papers that we'd like to write are going to be around leader standard work and the Managing for Daily Improvement system to kind of round out that whole thing. We're also doing some work on what I would call principle of the month discussion. So there's a couple of ways that you can get into this and track this. You can go to our website, go to the blog pages. You can see there's an example of the first one from January called Roger and Me. Read that and understand, why I titled it that way. Also, if you go to LinkedIn, the same blog posts that are on our IEX website are going to be found on LinkedIn this way. And so for January, there's been 4 thus far, the Roger and me, one on Herb Kelleher from Southwest, constancy of purpose in government, and then constancy of purpose in education. Might try to fit one more in the month of January, and then we'll pick another principle for the month of February. So these are interactive opportunities for people to see some of our current thinking, but also weigh in and broaden the thinking as well. And then finally, just another reminder, if you are interested in any topic or would like to share an improvement story, contact me at that email address, and we'll feature you just like we featured Tim today. So finally, I'd like to thank Tim again. Terrific presentation, a lot of good feedback so far, and I hope everyone, if you're traveling, travel safe. If you're where I live or close to where I live and it's cold or going to be cold, make sure you stay warm. So I hope everyone has a good day and a good weekend. Thanks for participating today.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining.
You bet. Thanks, Tim.
All right.